Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste and welcome to this 10 p.m. show on this Saturday. And first of all, I must apologize for starting a little bit late, and I think most of you would know the reason that the last session went on for more than 2 hours, and so we had very little time, and I had to finish my dinner as well. And now, of course, you know the topic, the most intolerant wins, and we have one of the most intolerant people around over here, Abhijit.
जय महाकाल.
जय महाकाल. आज किसकी शामत आई है?
वो तो सबकी शामत आएगी आज.
Oh, let me start with this. The reason that you win most of the time in all your debates is it because that you are the most intolerant?
Absolutely. You know, I was always told this, that get aggressive and never back down. Never ever back down, even if you're wrong. So this is one of the things that I learned long back. And, you know, it's a very simple advice that somebody gave me. This was actually at a very curious conservative conference where the Swedish and the Canadian conservatives told me this. But historically, if you look at it, the conservatives tend to be the most tolerant. It's usually the left that's the most intolerant, which is why they always win militarily, but they always lose the economics, as in within the country. They lose militarily when they're fighting other countries, but they always win militarily when they're fighting inside their own country, more often than not. And the only way you can sort of outwit the left in a civil war is to turn even more violent than the left. So, you know, it's a competition of intolerance. Let me give you an example. In the Russian Civil War, the Mensheviks were nasty. The whites, that is to say, the Tsarist supporters, were quite nasty themselves. But nobody could outmatch the brutality of the Bolsheviks. And that is why they won. You look at the Chinese Civil War, again, you know, Chiang Kai-shek loved his people. He just wasn't willing to go to the lengths that Mao Zedong was. And if you actually read Mao Zedong's own book, he talks about creating the contradictions of purpose, which is to use civilian populations as a shield to launch attacks, so that the point of the attack is to induce such a violent reprisal from the government that the people turn against you. And he's very clear about it, that the only way to control the population is that they must fear you more than they fear the other person. Right? You see this across the board. The only way the Spanish Franquistas were able to win the Spanish Civil War was being a lot nastier than the Spanish left was. And of course, you know, you can transpose this to the it doesn't even need to be a military confrontation. You can transpose this to the civilian sphere with, radical Muslims in this country. On one hand, they've terrorized their own population into, sort of appointing them their spokespersons. And, you know, the lack of the rule of law in this country only helps them. In Europe, it's the rule of law that helps them. In India, it is the lack of the rule of law that helps them. Because here, the police will do nothing. Because the police are more scared of this radical mullah. And his own people are dead scared of him. So who's going to stop him? So in the end, he always wins. You can even see this in a sense with the, farmers' protest at one level. The more, you don't even need to be violent. The more unwilling and inflexible you are, the more and more negotiating tools you end up having. So it's something you can just look at historical parallels over and over again. The same reason why, Roman, Greek, and Egyptian paganism, if you want to call it that, and Syrian paganism died out in favor of Christianity and then Islam. Of course, Islam never came in contact with paganism. Christianity had already wiped out paganism by the time Islam came in. So it's a competition of, it doesn't matter what your system of law is. A pre-industrial society like India, like ancient Egypt, like ancient Rome, with even modern India is, I would say ancient Rome probably had better law enforcement than modern India does. It will favor the intolerant. And also an advanced society, a stable society like, say, well, I can't call America an advanced society, but say Sweden or France or somebody like that, again, it will favor the intolerant.
Yes, please carry on.
Let me give you one of the examples of why this happens, right? You take the example of the Chatham Islands. Now, the Chatham Islands were also a Maori island, a few thousand kilometers away from New Zealand. And the difference was that in New Zealand, the Maoris were extremely violent and extremely warlike. There was cannibalism, there was large-scale genocide, and so on and so forth happening in the intra-Maori wars till the British came, and then it became a Maori-British war. But in the Chatham Islands, what had happened was that because the resources were so limited, these guys, they turned very docile. So it was the same. They could kind of mutually understand each other. They had a lot of similar customs and things like that. But the Chatham Island Maoris were very quiet. So 200-300 years after this group separates, the Maoris from the New Zealand mainland rediscover the Chatham Islands. And the Chatham Islanders had formed this thing that, hamara sab bhaichara hai, vasudhaiva kutumbakam. So, we, the way they used to argue was, for every winning argument, you put a stone. And whoever has the maximum number of stones wins the argument, and the village had to go his or her way. So what happens is, when the Maori imperial fleet, it had become an empire by then, even though you can't really call it imperial in that sense, but anyway, lands, the Chatham Islanders are like, oh, they must be just like us. I mean, we want to be inclusive and everything like that. So they had a debate, and they decided the next morning they would go and, invite them to share in the wealth and everything like that. It didn't come to that, because that very night when the Chatham Islanders were sleeping, the Maoris came, slit all their throats, killed them, ate most of them. And, the famous book Mutiny on the HMS Bounty, when Christian Fletcher and Captain Bligh land there a few years after this massacre happened, they found only 27 or 28 remaining Chatham Islanders out of a few hundred or a few thousand before. So this is the kind of course, this is a very extreme example, but we can go into hundreds of daily examples of where you say, "Theek hai bhai, chalta hai, hone do." This isn't serious enough. Ye jane do. And then finally everything starts collapsing around you. You don't realize it till it's too late. And the classic example of this, of course, is I can give you an ancient example and a modern example. The ancient example is the Roman Empire, the Christianization of the Roman Empire. And the new example is the way halal has completely taken over, even though halal is a virulently anti-Dalit thing, because, Dalits, like in the Japanese caste system here, butchery was seen as something dirty. Tannering, leather tanning was seen as something dirty, and therefore they were all declared Dalits. All the non-halal butchery shops used to belong to Indian Dalits. And they've all been kicked out of their business, forced to do other things and whatnot, because of this halal business. And we all say, हाँ भाई ठीक है यार, मैं इसमें मानता नहीं हूँ, झटका होगा तो ठीक है, नॉन हलाल होगा तो ठीक है, हलाल होने से क्या है. But a Muslim will never say क्या होने से ठीक है, उनको हलाल ही चाहिए. And so what has happened is, you have found a disproportionate percentage of halal across the world. It is not just in India. In India, it has become a virtual monopoly. And now halal certification is going into things like kashrut, kosher certification, into things that are not halal at all. Peanut butter का क्या halal होता है भाई? Peanut butter का गला throat slit करते हो क्या? नहीं. या पीनट प्लग करने के समय क्या बिस्मिल्लाह रहमान रहीम बोलना पड़ता है क्या? नहीं. So then how is a peanut butter halal? Turmeric, halal chili powder, halal peanut butter. Everything is halal these days. So you're seeing this sort of cartelization, and see, it helps both in the political interest because it marginalizes other communities, and it helps in the economic interest because it creates economic opportunity where you marginalize the others. And you look at the way the sort of Christianization of Rome happened. Right. With Egypt and Greece, they had no option. It was just shoved down their throat because it was part of the Roman Empire. But if you look at the way the Christianization of Rome happened, it follows a very, very similar trajectory, where the Christians would sort of form their own cliques and cabals and things like that. They would only give Christians businesses and things like that. The Romans would persecute them every 10, 15 years or so. But it was never a long-lasting persecution. And finally, when Christianity takes over, the virulence of the Christian persecutions of the pagans is next level, which you will never hear about because it's not properly documented. Very few people have actually documented what the Christians did to the pagans after that.
Yeah, but that story of how they managed to convert Constantine and then take over. In fact, the time they converted the emperor, they were less than 10% in the Roman Empire. And within the next 50 years, they wiped out everyone.
There was one notable exception, who was Julian the Apostate. Because remember, the virulence of the persecution didn't start immediately. It took about 60, 70 years for the persecutions to start. And then Julian was the last pagan emperor. He was a Christian. He gave up his Christianity back for the pagan religion. And in that sense, you can call him sort of the Akbar of the Roman Empire, who turns his back on Islam and says, "Main khud apna deen-e ilahi kar raha hoon." He says, I'm going back to the old pagan ways. But the kind of persecution that comes after Julian is particularly notable. One of the very important points, of course, that this is in Gibbon. And, Gibbon is the preeminent historian of the Roman Empire. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Right. I've read that book.
Rise and fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, for us, I know with all these new kids, koi naya book hoga, but for hamare liye, the Bible was Gibbon. And when you go back to Gibbon, imagine this guy was writing in the 1800s. There is no better book I have read. His analysis of all the Caesars is still so accurate economically and everything and other thing. And he makes a very, very important point. He says that, the emperors Trajan, Hadrian, Septimus Severus, Marcus Aurelius especially, were extremely great philosophers of their times. They welcomed ideas from every part of the empire, and they were open to every this thing. Remember, by the end of the Roman Empire, the god of the Roman legions wasn't Mars anymore. It wasn't the Roman god of war. It became the Parthian god, the god of their enemy, Mitra, after whom I am meant to be named, Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Mitra comes from the god Mitra. Mitra becomes the Persian god Mitra, and then there are lots of enemies of Rome called Mitra Mitra deities.
In Bengal, they call it Mitra. Why you call it Mitra?
Mitra. So Mitra became the god of the Roman legions, and it didn't have a violent thing. You just adopted it, and you were cool about it. Trajan is known to have worshipped at a Mitra temple at some point. Now, the problem is, how is it that these very, very open minds, and this is a question Gibbon asks, saw absolutely no intellectual or philosophical redeeming factor in Christianity? So how is it that a religion that had no intellectually redeeming factors managed to conquer the empire? And it wasn't, I can tell you, it wasn't, as Christ said, through turning the other cheek. It had nothing to do with turning the other cheek. It had to do with cabals and cliques. And one of the things that you see that's the closest to the sort of socio-economic takeover of the Roman Empire is the halal industry.
Oh, quite right. I think the halal is a very good example, and we see that creeping intolerance of halal into every walk of life, as you mentioned. And some of the finest examples, of course, you talked about peanut butter, but even cosmetics are becoming halal. And of course, we are now running a full campaign against this intolerance. And let's talk about the Karl Popper Paradox. It says that the tolerating intolerance will surely mean the end of tolerance in the long run. And I think we can see that in the Islamic invasions when they were fighting their wars with absolute barbarity, with the what is called complete annihilation, or you can call it a total war kind of a scenario, if you take the total football example. And the Indians, they were, contrary to whatever is peddled as history, for 500 years, they kept the Arabs at bay. In fact, we know that Muhammad bin Qasim and his forces, they were all chased away by the by Bappa Rawals and the Pratiharas and of Gujarat. And for 500 years, they did not let them come anywhere near it. But then they were following dharmic practices. And they would not touch the civilian population. They would not harm the women. They would not indulge in rapes and plunders and the male ghanimat kind of a thing. And when the enemy came visiting again, it came with double the fury and even greater intolerance. And that brought in what is called the demoralization. And we was talking in the previous session, the 4 stages of subverting a country, starting with demoralization and then going on to ultimately creating a destabilization, then crisis, and then takeover. And
So
that intolerance is written as I think the subtext to each of these enemy actions.
It's slightly so just to give some context, we mostly didn't deal with the Arab conquest. The Arab conquests were dealt with very rapidly, and they didn't actually impact us too much. It was the Turkic conquest that really impacted us. And we need to remember that the Turks, Ghazni, for example, his granddad had still been a Buddhist, apparently. So he was the second or third generation convert to Islam who was very keen to prove his mettle. Now, what amuses me, what Huntington says in his book, Who We Are, is that a national identity is comprised of 2 parts. What connects us, so that's called substance, and what divides us, that's called salience. So what connects Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Sanjay Dixit, that is our substance. And what separates Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Sanjay Dixit from Imran Khan, that is our salience. Right. Now, the problem is that in Hinduism, just in like Roman paganism, in Greek paganism, and in Egyptian paganism, you didn't have the concept of an enemy god. You accepted all gods. So when Rome conquers Egypt, or Greece conquers Egypt and Rome conquers Greece, you see all the gods, tumhare bhagwan hamare bhagwan hai, hamare bhagwan tumhare bhagwan hai. Right? So Mars becomes Ares in Greece. Venus becomes Aphrodite. The Roman Venus is identified with the Greek Aphrodite, is identified with Isis in Egypt. And so all the temple practices became interchangeable. A Roman never felt out of place going to an Egyptian temple and worshipping out there. Right? Just like we don't see a problem going to a Jain temple or a Gurdwara and worshipping out there. and for a large part also vice versa. But this doesn't happen with Christianity in the Roman Empire. It doesn't happen here. So what is this thing? It is not just intolerance. It is also a lack of identifying ourselves. We don't have a concept of salience. Why is it, when Ghazni comes and destroys the Somnath temple, that was the same year that Rajendra Chola built his great fleet to go sack the what empire was it in Malaysia? The Sri Vijaya, to go sack the Sri Vijaya Empire.
Sri Vijaya.
So what exactly? And Rajendra Chola was a great Shiva Bhakta, and Somnath is a Jyotirlinga. So what was Rajendra Chola sitting and doing when this thing was? Why is it that when Persia invades Greece, all the Greek states, including Sparta and Athens, who are arch rivals, come together to defeat Persia? But why is it when Ghazni comes into India or Ghori comes into India, we aren't able to unite to defeat Ghori or Ghazni? तो problem हमारे में भी है. It's no problem. It's no point saying wo intolerant hai. And throughout this, I think you have to look at the Bahmani Sultanate, the Deccani Sultanates, the Madurai Sultanate, which was a horrible, horrible, horrible sultanate. It was one of the absolute worst. They had no ambiguity about who they were not, and who they were meant to kill. In spite of this, in all the Hindu kingdoms, including and right up to Shivaji, they simply can't bring themselves to say, "Tum hamare nahi ho. You are not us. We don't want you. Go back to where you came from." आजकल Twitter पे बहुत बोलते हैं, "Go back to where you came from." Shivaji never said, "Go back to where you came from." As far as he was concerned, Aurangzeb was just as Indian as him. Even though Aurangzeb probably didn't consider himself an Indian. Right? So we've got to think what is wrong in our DNA. When somebody is telling us, "I'm going to rape your women, kill you, destroy you, whatever," as Aurangzeb did, it doesn't elicit the same response from us towards them. Historically. Today, I see a lot of it happen on Twitter. The problem is it's very crude and violent. It's not a sophisticated counter argument to it. And abhi to mass violence ho bhi nahi raha hai. So what are you going to get violent about? Right? But it is the economic angle of it which you're still not getting. There was a very good reason why Hindu merchants managed to do okay under the Muslims, and that was because usury wasn't allowed. A Muslim wasn't allowed to. The ulema would never allow interest rates and things like that, and so the same role that Jewish merchants had in Europe, because Christians weren't allowed to do usury, Hindu merchants took over. But that doesn't mean somebody is tolerant. There's a big difference. It's like saying Europe was tolerant to Jews. We all know it was not. So this is the same argument you hear here. Now, in Europe, one of the things where they've been able to succeed in terms of anti-Semitism is to have the penalization of Holocaust denial. Why? Because it's not a freedom of speech issue, it's a downstream issue. The psychological consequences of Holocaust denial mean that you can do the same thing over again, or you can justify it retrospectively. In India, our entire history today is Holocaust denial of one kind or the other. You get your PhDs based on what great atrocity you can whitewash. So there's a huge problem out here, and it's not just a problem with the other side. Okay? Now here's the problem. If you have the rule of law, and this is a big dilemma, you can control the kind of rampant rapine rioting that you have, and mind you, this isn't just what we're seeing in this part. You have a lot of this in the Northeast happening against the tribals who have now been completely converted over to Christianity. And it wasn't exactly done in a very peaceful way either. But once you have the rule of law, you have to have equality in that rule of law. And this is where we see France is going one step ahead. That, churches, gurdwaras, and things can receive foreign funding and their own indoctrination or whatever from the Vatican. But they are, for the first time, violating their own constitution and bringing in a Muslim-specific law. Before, when a Muslim-specific law was brought in, it had to do with burqas and in school. And because they could not make it religion-specific, they said all outward symbols of religion. So turbans had to go, which means Sikhs suffered. And there, the French interpretation was, look, it says kesh, it does not say pagdi. So the 5 things, kacha, kripan, kesh, kanga, what's the other one? Kada. They said it says kesh, it doesn't say pagdi, so you can wear your hair long, that's a fashion statement, but you can't wear your turban. Surprisingly, small crosses, if you wore a small cross, it was allowed because it was considered a fashion statement. But it generally conformed to French secular law overall. This one absolutely violates the French laïcité concept completely, because it makes the law only for mosques, for foreign indoctrination happening. So it actually excludes Catholic priests going to the Vatican, because the Catholic clergy is an international clergy. So it excludes them. And this is what you will see. The answer to intolerance is even more intolerance. You'd never win intolerance through with tolerance. Another example is being woke. Wokes are the most intolerant little shits you will ever get on the face of this earth. What we used to call very charitably, they used to be referred to as trailer park trash in industrial America. The inbreeding types that used to live in trailer parks and work as blue collar laborers. The new version of that is woke. Okay, they're all the unemployable, the hideous, the unemployable, the irredeemable in that sense. And they want to normalize their irredeemability. They want to they want to believe that their unemployability is because of privilege or lacking privilege or whatever. And they are the most intolerant people you can get at the moment. The answer to them is not to give in. The answer to them is to crush them viciously, and crush them with every single organ of the law you have. We think of them today as a joke. The Romans used to think of Christians as a joke at one point of time. The people of Mecca thought of Muhammad as a joke at one point of time. Look where it got all of them. Okay, you can't take these wokes lightly. They need a violent counter reaction to them, and they need to be crushed here and now, not tomorrow. Now. Yesterday would have been preferable.
Okay, right. Now let's transpose this whole discussion to the present time. Let's look at India. You think much of our problem comes from tolerating too much of intolerance? We have so many examples. In last 1 year itself, we have the CAA protests, Shaheen Bagh we have. Now we have this spectacle of these farmer protests going on and sitting and squatting in spite of a specific Supreme Court fiat that said that you can't do that. And all that is still happening. Is it because we are tolerating too much of intolerance? And if that happens, are we heading the Roman Empire way?
Well, look, we're definitely heading the Roman Empire way. The problem here is that we have no rule of law. It's sequential, like how threats mutate, like a virus threat mutates, all microbiological threats mutate. So this is a mutation. The first way you control it is ruthless application of the rule of law. And as you well know, because you've been secretary to you've been cabinet secretary in Rajasthan, chief secretary in Rajasthan, you know this better than anyone. There is no rule of law in this country. It's आया राम गया राम, जो मन में आया करो, जिस दिन चाहिए करो.
Can I just supplement you? When I was a probationer, I just went for district training. We had the foundation course and the phase 1 in Missouri. And then we went for district training where you have attachments with all branches. And then I was attached to a Thana. We had a very seasoned SHO. So you know what he says? He told me the first thing. साहब आप ये ध्यान रखना, लॉ एंड ऑर्डर आप बोलते हो ना, तो ये लॉ एंड ऑर्डर नहीं होता है, ये लॉ और ऑर्डर होता है. आप लॉ संभालोगे तो ऑर्डर जाएगा, ऑर्डर संभालोगे तो लॉ इग्नोर करना पड़ेगा. Just to add to what you say.
So this is exactly what you're seeing with the farm protests, na? Technically, they are not allowed to blockade. But the government isn't even acting on the blockade. Why? Because they fear something is going to happen. This is what they did. They sat on their fat asses throughout Shaheen Bagh, which ultimately morphed into the Delhi riots, and 54 people lost their lives. And not one single government official has been held responsible for command failure. It's very easy to find scapegoats in Umar Khalid and things like that. ठीक है, they might have भड़काओfied it, but तुम वो फोन सुन रहे थे जब वो बोल रहा था कि धमाका करना है. I don't think it's an accurate interpretation because nobody knew. There's a big problem with the timelines that nobody knew Trump was coming then. But assume somebody heard this conversation कि हमको धमाका करना है जब ट्रंप आता है. What was the police, the home secretary and the home minister doing at that point of time sitting on that intelligence? They sat on that intelligence and let it happen. So your SHO was wrong. It is law and order. The problem is Indians think it is law or order, and they don't realize that if there is no absolute and consistent application of the law, there will be no order. If you have law now, there will be order later. If you have no law now, there will be no order later.
Yeah, because whenever I was in charge of law enforcement as a subdivision magistrate or district magistrate, my instructions were clear that if you enforce law today, you may have slight disorder, but then you will have order for the rest of your tenure. Be rest assured. And we followed that, and we always had that.
And this is sort of classic appeasement, na? Hitler never got appeased. Ultimately, he came for everything. Ek ke baad ek ke baad ek. It's the same philosophy across the board. So the point here is that in India, being a pre-industrial society, the first thing you can do to deal with intolerance, we're not talking about an advanced industrial society like France. Uska solution baad mein aayega. Abhi ke liye, you just impose law and order. And that in itself will be enough. As long as you impose law and order, you will be in a good stead for at least the next 70 to 100 years till you fully industrialize. Uske baad, we'll have to look at it anew and look at other and different solutions.
Okay, now let's talk of the intolerance of a different order. And this is the intolerance. Okay, I don't know whether you would like to go that way. I was about to talk about the judiciary.
About the?
Judiciary.
I might not want to go to jail again, but let's talk about it esoterically, shall we? All in abstractions.
Right. Let's try and escape intolerance as much as we can.
No, but what specifically in the judiciary?
Well, we see again law being applied selectively, number one. Being intolerant towards the tolerant, and being tolerant towards the intolerant.
So this is one of those things
Shall
that
I
the
give
Indian...
examples?
No, there's lots of examples. The Indian judiciary is that typical, the mentality is the same as the British judiciary. They don't believe the onus of law is of keeping the law is on them, because the whole point of the British colonization was, we are here to rule you, to extract from you. You make this as less painful for us as possible. If you want to go around killing each other, that's fine. Don't kill any white people. So the jurisprudence that has evolved so far is, तुमको बीच में अपने आप में जो करना है कर लो, but we are here only to do this. There is no judicial precedence of this. There is so much judicial capriciousness on this that you don't know what is the rule of law. I mean, imagine taking 3 months to decide that Shaheen Bagh was illegal. They didn't even have a... How is it that a Supreme Court takes 3 months to decide that Shaheen Bagh is illegal when they're blockading and trampling on the rights of others? And what is the solution to it? Mediation karo. Tomorrow, well, this is going to get to contempt of court, so I'm not going to give you the example of what I propose to do. You try blockading some house and see what happens. I'm sure it won't even take them 3 seconds to declare it illegal. But, you know, so this is the thing. They've got this British colonial mentality seeped into them. That said, this whole issue of, because I deal a lot with inward investments, you know, consultancies for it. And the one thing I realize is the largest possible chunk of risk that is set aside is for judicial unpredictability in this country. Even more than regulatory unpredictability, it is set aside for judicial unpredictability. That is the single biggest deterrent. It is not Modi's economic policy, it is judicial unpredictability. Of course, nobody will say this in public. But I've seen the accounting, the way it's done, and that is the way it is done. Now, Hinduism in this context then suffers from another problem. All the Abrahamic religions are textual, right? They're all text-based religions. A lot of the Indian culture is verbal. It is verbal, it is traditional, it's passed on from person to person, and it is myriad. There is no one book, there is no one canon, nothing like that. And the problem with the legal system we have is that it will always prioritize a written version over a non-written version. And therein, for every piece of litigation that a Hindu does against an Abrahamic on a religious issue, you automatically fall into this, the jurisprudence and the law is structured against a non-textual religion. So even in the starting itself, you're handicapped. One hand is tied behind your back. तो कहाँ से जाओगे आप? ठीक है ना? So there are several layers to this. Intolerance is one, but then, you know, even at the macro level, fixing things like the rule of law, the government isn't interested in. Fixing things like this jurisprudence that says, you know, textuality has to be prioritized over non-textuality, which is a complex subject because, you know, in a modern state, I've actually been to strategic conferences which used to say things like, you know, for 5,000 years, the Vedas was never written down. Why do we need a written national security doctrine? So they used to apply religious concepts to strategic studies and the functioning of a modern state. This is it's a very, very problematic concept that is at the core of a lot of the intolerance towards Hinduism that you see within the judiciary. And you have to find, I've racked my brains, and I mean, probably not as much as I should. I haven't come across a solution for this, where you enshrine traditional practices at an equal footing as textual references. And sometimes it's not even very advisable, but a solution to this has to be found. There's no easy way out of it.
Actually, it was done. It was done. As the Article 26 was included actually at the instance of the Kanchi Shankaracharya. And look what the judiciary made out of it. They got that Shirur Mutt judgment, and they made it again totally anti-Hindu. That is why, in fact,
forget Article 26. Look what the judiciary did to the Kanchi Shankaracharya himself on fake trumped-up murder charges.
Yes, it took him such a long time to come out of it. And even then, the intolerant people made it up as if it was some kind of a fixed match or something.
Of course. जब वो कहते हैं तो हमेशा सच होता है, जब हम कहते हैं सब कंस्पिरेसी होता है, बस.
Yes, that's always the case. That's always the case. So, well, let's come to the more difficult part. We've analyzed the problem. We've diagnosed it. We have seen it in the ancient context. We have seen it in the modern Indian context. If we want, we can even see in the context of what is happening in the United States today. Is something very similar. You can just do a United States a bit, and then I go to the next one.
Well, the US, what you see is everybody going crazy, calling Trump bigot. And this is the same bunch of shits who are supporting rioters, the worst kind of identity politics, and creating a coalition of gripe. There is no worse player of ethno-identity politics than the Democrats. And if you don't agree with them, everybody else is a bigot. So today, Tulsi introduced this legislation which prevents non-gender women from competing in women's sports. Because as of now, the way legislation in sports is going, I can claim that I'm a self-identified woman, and they will actually drop at some point in the near future, if things go this way, they will even drop the hormone requirement. So you can have men who come a bronze medal in the men's contest, claim that they are that they self-identify as women, and if they can fix the estrogen testosterone balance, they can actually go and compete as women, having the genitalia of a man. And she is now being labeled a bigot for insisting that women's sports must be restricted to biological women alone. And so you might now have a third category, which is the non-determinate category of sports. So you'll have men's events, women's events, and soon to come, a non-determinate Wimbledon. So, and a non-determinate French Open, and a non-determinate Tour de France, and things like that. At some point, you've really got to sit and wonder. It's, we keep saying it's not the extremes. It's not the extremes. Some of these people like Ilhan Omar are too extreme. That is not what wokeism is about. That is not what this is about. Wrong. Because it is the extremes that always capture the conversation every single time and place. And it is the extremes that you end up gravitating. Especially in an age of social media, where only about 5 to 7% of the population, anthropologically speaking, can understand nuance. The rest of them prefer black and white explanations. So you're stuck in a very, very difficult position. That the most intolerant people in America are the ones claiming to be the most tolerant and trying to kick out everybody else as intolerant. And that is the beauty of this, and that is also the danger of this. That everybody sees that this is this hellhole of a circus happening, and nobody has the guts to call it out for what it is, because you face serious consequences.
So actually, that's what we were discussing in the previous session. The way of the left, the Vishala Vampant, that was the topic, and how the left operates. And it seems that right now, the United States is more leftist than the bastion of the left, Russia itself. It's probably more leftist than China itself. I think.
Much more so, institutionally so. And this is what it's quite amusing that the USSR, people assumed the USSR lost the Cold War. I would humbly submit to you that the USSR did not lose the Cold War. They kept the war latent, and they executed a institutional capture of the United States. And the USA is the new USSR. And it should change its name to the United Socialist of America. Unitsky Soyuzna Amerikansky.
United States of Socialist America, USSA.
USSA.
USSA. Yeah, actually, there's complete unanimity between my previous speaker and you on this point. Absolute unanimity. So I think I'm going to have two very important people agreeing on something, which rarely happens. So it's a good day for me today. Now let's come to the more tricky situation. How do you tackle this? How do you get the better of it?
So the answer to, like I said, the answer to intolerance is not tolerance. The answer to intolerance is even more intolerance. Identify the threat, eliminate, show no remorse, show no pity, show no mercy, because they will show you none. Okay. Today, our need to sort of see wokeism, and by wokeism, understand, you notice that one of the things that I've been trying to do over the last 45 minutes is to show you how there are very similar strands between wokeism, early Christianity, and Turkic Islam. It's the same sort of unmerciless, pitiless, colonial imperialist agenda, imperialism of the mind, but also physical imperialism. Because remember, it is the same wokes that are the biggest advocates of regime change across the world. Okay, so there is a common strand to all of this. There is a reason that communism and Islamism across the world are hand in glove. They're two facets of the same coin. Now, how do you get the solution to this? It's not by turning the other cheek. It's by realizing the threat for what it is. Unfortunately, when I see us today in the face of wokeism, to me, this is exactly what India looked like in 1200 AD, when you had Iltutmish sitting on the throne somewhere, planning his great conquest of India, Iltutmish through Balban, and we're none the wiser for it. We're exactly the same way we were under Alauddin Khilji. And we somehow think that having somebody like Modi is going to protect us. It doesn't protect you at all, because Modi's done absolutely nothing. Like we've seen, he's actually been extraordinarily incompetent at law and order, phenomenally so. I actually remember the Congress used to be far more ruthless and efficient at law and order than Modi has been his entire 6 years. तो करेंगे क्या आप? You're screwed. Your only option is incompetence, is an incompetent man. And the opposition, if you don't like that incompetent man, the opposition is completely in cahoots with the other side. So, you're stuck between the, क्या कहते हैं?
Rock and
What
a
is
hard
that?
place.
हाँ, rock and a hard place. Choose क्या करेंगे आप? एक तो मित्रों करके भाषण देते रहेगा, कुछ करेगा नहीं. दूसरा आपको चक्कू लेके मारेगा. तो इट्स ऑलमोस्ट परफेक्टली कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री. एक चक्कू आके मारेगा, दूसरा देखे अरे मित्रों ये मत कीजिए करके वासुदेव कुटुंबकम बोलते रहेगा. Basically, in the long term, you're screwed.
Solution, sir?
Solution, sir, there is none. You're screwed. We can have these hypothetical solutions. Like I said, the first one is to introduce rule of law, judicial reforms and police reforms. Nobody has the guts to do that. Nobody has any interest in doing it, क्योंकि उनका धंधा खप हो जाएगा. है ना? तो even the basics nobody is willing to do. और अभी कमेंट्स देखिए जो मैंने मोदी के बारे में बोला, कितने गालियां पड़ने वाली हैं. अभी देखते रहिए, गालियां पड़ने वाली हैं. मोटे गंजे होमो पता नहीं क्या क्या. ठीक है, बोलो, मेरा क्या जाता है.
एक भी नहीं आई. I have to tell you that I haven't seen a single one.
अच्छा, अभी आएंगे. They're just absorbing. मैंने बोल दिया कि उनका हीरो incompetent है.
This is one. He has a Bengali communist streak. Yeah.
Yes, see, there you go. I'm a communist apparently. हाँ, चलो. See, talking about Bengali communism, India has never had a more left-wing leader than Modi. And you would know this only if you were a Bengali and knew how to make macher jhol. Because in macher jhol, there are only two spices, turmeric and red chili. One is saffron and one is red, and you get the analogy of what I'm talking about. The saffron party and the red party. When you mix saffron and red, the macher jhol doesn't end up yellow. It ends up red. There is no combination of colors in which a saffron communism or Hinduism, political Hinduism absorbing the economic characteristics of socialism ends up being saffron in the end. And take the macher jhol as the classic example of yellow and red being saffron and red being completely intercompatible. हल्दी और लाल मिर्च के बीच में लाल मिर्च हमेशा जीतेगा. लाल सलाम. Macher jhol is that is why Bengal is communist, because the metaphor lies in the macher jhol, which is the the beating heart of every Bengali.
But apparently you're a Tamil as well. What is the beating heart of a Tamil?
I don't know. I'm yet to figure it out. I can't say mutton pepper fry because tam bram. We don't eat mutton pepper fry. I think it's rasam, but no, there is no beating heart of a Tamil at the moment.
Okay. So right now, I think Tamil Nadu is in some kind of a crossroads. Anyway, that we'll discuss later. So, okay, so you're not coming out with any good solution. You are sounding to be a very, very great pessimist.
No, I've given you the solution. I've given you the solution, but my solution is that the government doesn't have the guts to implement the solution. They will not implement judicial reforms. They will not implement police reforms. Hoga hi nahi. They've got their hands in the till. They have no interest in implementing these reforms. And this na khaunga na khane dunga, it doesn't actually translate on the ground. I've actually seen, personally, I've seen the amount of corruption has actually gone up exponentially at the lower levels. because GST is now being used to extort. Okay, every Tom, Dick and Harry is basically extorting. And this is what happens when you come up with GST saying, देखो बर्फी का 18% लगेगा, पर बर्फी के ऊपर अगर पिस्ता होगा या चॉकलेट लेयर होगा वो 28% लगेगा. यार एक हलवाई टैक्स करते रहेगा या बर्फी बनाते रहेगा यार? ये ऐसे ऐसे लॉ बनाते हैं. एंड यू नो इन दिस कंट्री any law that is over one page is a crooked law, because complexity is how you hide the workaround. How to avoid the law is hidden in the complexity of the language. ठीक है ना? तो ये सब ये बात नहीं है. So अगर बीजेपी की ये औकात है, I would say, you know, sometime in around 2120, assume you are either going to be a Christian state or a Muslim state. तुम भूल ही जाओ. तुम्हारी औकात नहीं है हिंदू स्टेट बनने की, तुम्हारा विल पावर ही नहीं है बनने की, तुम्हारा मीन्स नहीं है बनने का. Hinduism will become an obsolete religion in about 100 years. It will be non-existent in 100 years.
I think we'll pick you up as a great warrior and put you in front.
मैं वॉरियर नहीं हूँ. जब मेरे को जेल में डाला था मैंने अपोलोजाइज करके भाग गया. मैं किसी का वॉरियर नहीं हूँ. So you know, this is, you remember that story about
some people who are forced to become warriors, you know, that's the forced warrior.
No, you remember Karna and the Karna story, na? The sage was lying on Karna's lap and the scorpion came and bit him. And when the sage woke up, he's like, you have lied to me. You cannot be the son of a Brahmin. A Brahmin would have screamed and run away hollering. You must be a Kshatriya and you have learned all these mantras for me, which was only meant to be for a Brahman. I am that kind, Baba. तुम मेरे को बू बोलोगे मैं आ करके भाग जाऊंगा. It is not my, it is my dharma to teach you. It is not my dharma to fight. And okay, this is there in the Mahabharata. I have textual validation for it.
Anyway, textual validation doesn't count in Hinduism.
Alas. No, but textual validation counts. Oral history does not count. This is textual validation.
Textual validation. I'll give you another from Bhagavad Gita. It says that if you have the direct experience, texts do not matter.
Hello?
You heard me?
नहीं ब्रेकअप हो गया पूरा.
मैं कह रहा हूँ मेरे पास भगवत गीता का टेक्सचुअल एविडेंस है which says that if you have the direct experience and direct evidence, then text does not matter. Even Vedas do not matter.
पर देखिए यहाँ पे ना मैंने you know what IST is when talking about time? What is IST?
Well, what's your
GMT IST? No. What is IST? No. आप बताइए. What is IST?
I only knew Indian Standard Time, unless you have something else in mind.
No, it's called Indian Stretchable Time. क्योंकि इधर अगर आप 8:30 बोलोगे, सब 10 10:30 को ही पहुंचेंगे दारू पीने के लिए, डिनर के लिए, ठीक है ना? So it's called Indian Stretchable Time. It's like that. It's called Indian Stretchable Morals, Indian Stretchable Law, Indian Stretchable. Everything about India is stretchable. रबर बैंड की तरह है. तो जो चाहे मन में उसको स्ट्रेच कर लो, ये कर लो, वो कर लो, चलता है. क्या करना है अब? It's a lost cause. It's a lost war. If this is your A team, what you have in charge today is your A team of Hinduism, अगर ये धर्म राजा है तो तुम्हारा धर्म ही गया बच्चे. कुछ नहीं होने वाला. गोविंदा बोलो, संन्यास ले लो.
On that note,
all our viewers should take brahmacharya and go up to the Himalayas. कुछ बचेगा नहीं 100 साल.
Okay, so if you are not liking that solution, let's move to the question and answers now and have some, what is called, some more great Abhijitisms.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.